everyone. Welcome to the Christmas edition of Late Nights with Lenin. And since I'm not really, even have a Santa hat on to get into a little Christmas mood, I guess. Even though I don't know how I feel about Christmas. I mean, I like Christmas in theory, but I just don't like the way it's kind of makes people stressed out because they're so alienated from their families that they don't really like spending time with these people, and it's kind of like a hostage situation, and there is no real community that you can like gather with because again of capitalist alienation. So I guess that's what I don't like. And also tell me when you can't hear me because this is not I'm at my sister's house and this is my brother-in-law's microphone because he couldn't figure out how to put in my microphone. And this microphone is not as nice as mine. I mean, it is nice. It's a very nice, it's a dynamic, whatever. Not a condenser versus dynamic or something. I don't know. But I need to be more directly connected with it in order for you to hear me. So let's see. Oh yeah, I heard Chile had an election. We need to hear what the ordinary Chilean voter thinks about Gabriel Boric, the leftist candidate. Let's go interview the ordinary Chilean.
A distant cousin of the former dictator disagrees.
I think that populism is something really, really bad that's been happening in our continent. The dictatorship is part of our history, and we cannot deny that. But now we're in 2021.
These elections have pushed people to choose extremes.
Gonzalo Pinochet is who BBC chooses to interview, like as the ordinary cast voter. Like seriously, Gonzalo Pinochet. So the jury's still out on Gabriel Boric. Well, okay, so he is, I heard, kind of like a low-key sock dem kind of type, but he has collated with people. He's like in the unity ticket of all the leftist parties. So we kind of just have to see what happens and what doesn't happen. And inshallah, if there is a CIA mole in his cabinet, he will get taken out. So, and Merry Christmas to Artificio and Shadi Haza. Aren't you Muslim? I don't know. And good evening. Happy holidays from COVID isolation. Yeah. Good evening. So, we are, let's see, what else do we have to talk about? Nothing really much. Well, yeah, I don't really have anything else. Today we have Moth from Indiana, and we read part 3 of the agrarian question and the critics of Marx. And it's actually a really good discussion because we get into the opium epidemic and all sorts of other things. So, and afterwards, we will be back and I'll be reading from Nadezhda Remenin. I cannot pronounce that word. I'm going to have to figure this out. I forgot how to pronounce that word. Reminisces again. And that's about it. So see you in an hour-ish, I guess. Well, ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas, everyone. And thanks for joining us on our Christmas Day episode of Late Nights with Lenin. We have a guest today. Our guest is Moth from Indiana. So how are you doing, Moth?
No, not too bad. Just kind of getting my day started.
So I heard that you're working on Christmas Eve. What kind of labor conditions is that?
Oh, I do work in food, so it's kind of a given.
Okay. So in food, as in restaurant or catering?
Yeah, I work at a local pizza place.
And you guys have to work on Christmas Eve. That is, I had no idea.
Yeah, it's the same hours as normal too. It's 11 to 9 that we're open. So I work 5 to 9.
Oh, wow. And you work every day or do you get any days off?
Normally I work 4 11-hour shifts and then get 3 days off.
Ah, okay. So you live in Indiana. I
Yeah.
come from Michigan, so I don't know. Indiana is like a big strip mall.
Oh, it's terrible here.
Okay, so just you want to talk a little bit about anything regarding what's going on there?
I mean, there's not really too much going on here right now. I know that like where I'm at, we just kind of I pass out Narcan and stuff, and I volunteer at the food pantries whenever I have the chance. So it's pretty low key around here.
What do you volunteer as?
The food pantry.
Oh, that's really nice of you. That's for people who can't afford and the SNAP benefits are pitiful. Like it's impossible to live. Like I don't even know what they are, but they're horrible.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So the food pantry is for, like you said, it's for people who can't afford to go to the store and stuff. And so I volunteer whenever I can. And then I do harm reduction. So I pass out Narcan and I teach people how to use that. So that, you know, anybody that's
what do you
over,
teach?
I teach people how to use Narcan, like how to administer
What's a
it.
Narcan?
It's how you reverse opiate overdoses.
Oh, okay. So when somebody has an opiate overdose, they need to get a dose of this drug called Narcan?
Yeah, it's naloxone is the actual name of the drug, and it blocks the receptors in the brain that the opioids plug, and allows your body to go back to somewhat normal functioning.
And is it the one injected in the heart, or is that a different drug?
No, that I think would be adrenaline, but Narcan is normally any fatty area, so like your thigh, your thigh, your butt cheek, somewhere that's got a lot of muscle to it.
Okay, and why do you need to train people to do it? Like, why can't doctors and nurses do it? Just curious.
Just because a lot of times people who overdose are at their house.
Uh-huh.
And if you call police or something, like if you call an ambulance and say that there's a drug overdose, then police come and then everybody gets in trouble. And that's not beneficial to people who are, you know, using drugs, and whether they're trying to get off them or not. Like having everybody get, you know, a charge or a felony or whatever it doesn't help anybody out. So if you show people how to use that on their own, it eliminates, you know, having to call an ambulance or anything. Unless, because like, I mean, you can call an ambulance, and if you tell them that someone has stopped breathing, they won't send police, but a lot of people don't know that. So they call an ambulance and they're like, you know, hey, somebody just overdosed. And then the police show up first.
Jesus.
And then that.
So this is like something that it's like an emergency treatment. So when they overdose, if you give them this during it, it like stops the process, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll bring them back to consciousness or allow them to breathe.
Okay, and that's the most important problem with overdose?
Yeah, typically, because opioids are downers, so they shut your central nervous system down completely. So if you can't breathe, like once you lose the ability to breathe because your body doesn't function properly, like your brain stops sending that, and it can't send the proper signals to your lungs and stuff. It just kind of shuts down, and then you have 10 minutes or whatever from the time you stop breathing before you start getting brain damage. Something close to that.
Wow.
Don't quote me on the exact time there.
Oh, okay. No. This is really interesting stuff because I know nothing about this. What's really funny is that in China, before the British got it wasn't the same. This one, like, this is like a processed manufactured, like, this is like no way in comparison to the drug that they were addicted to in China, because the modern drug is like industrial processed. It has all sorts of genetic, not genetic, chemical engineering. So right before, like, the drug problem was really bad until they had the revolution in 1949. And when people's living conditions improved, they just were like, oh, we don't need drugs. And the same thing happened in the Soviet Union. And then after the fall of Soviet Union, alcoholism increased by like a unbelievable amount. So how did Indiana get such a big problem with opioid addiction?
Well, that kind of just came with the rest of the United States right now is under the biggest opioid epidemic ever. And it started with the U.S. troops in Afghanistan. You can find pictures of them online. We went over there and we just guarded poppy fields. Mm-hmm. That was a lot of what we did was besides, taking their oil from them and stealing that. We were also making sure that the poppy fields were protected. And then as you literally look at the timeline from the time that the troops started coming back and from like the end of their tours and stuff is right about the time, like almost exactly that the opioid crisis started to rise here. And it's because we just started bringing the poppy seeds back and putting the heroin out there. And because because escapism is tied to capitalism and, you have that urge to not exist in this reality where everything is falling apart and you're having to watch, the prices of things go up and you can't afford to eat. Everyone just started, doing heroin on top of the fact that with our DARE program, we told everybody that.
The drug abuse. Fake one.
They told everybody that, marijuana was a gateway drug. And so then on top of the fact that we were funneling all of this heroin in, once you have a bunch of people once the millennials, started seeing, they're like, oh, well, pot isn't a gateway. Like, pot's not that bad. Maybe everything else they said isn't that bad. So then you get people that try heroin and all sorts of stuff. And it's due to escapism and capitalism on top of the fact that our war on drugs was just disgusting.
I've actually had this exact same conversation with somebody on Twitter about heroin not being bad. And I'm like, it was created by IG Farben, the same people that made the concentration camps. It's an industrial it's like not a plant. It's an industrial process created by these people who did the Holocaust. Do you trust them with your body?
Yeah.
I remember having this conversation on Twitter with I hope it's like a teenager. And I was trying to explain that there's a big difference between taking a plant and process, boiling it or smoking it or whatever they do with a plant that exists in nature versus an industrial process created by Bayer or IG Farben, the same people who did the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Wow. So this is, I know what we're going to read is we're going to read about how agriculture works. And I guess Indiana has a lot of cows, right?
Yeah, we have a bunch of corn too. That's a
lot of corn. Okay. So that's how the segue is. So last week we had our guest Yuri read parts 1 and 2. It was hilarious because Lenin was making fun of this econ thesis. And the funny thing is that they still teach that crap in Econ 101 in America, even today, even though Lenin debunked that crap. So now, so we are in part 3, machinery in agriculture. And if there are numbers here, like the table, it would just, I will put up the table. So don't read out the table. That's pointless.
Okay. Let's see. So let us now pass to what Mr. Bulgakov regards as the remarkable work of Hertz. We shall need, however, to spend a little time in simultaneously examining similar arguments by both authors.
So now he's it's funny because last week it was Mr. Bulgakov's PhD thesis. Imagine having your PhD thesis deconstructed by Lenin. Oh, painful. And now Mr. Bulgakov cited some guy named Hertz in that page, Otto Hertz, the agrarian questions in relation to socialism, in that PhD thesis. And now Lenin is out for blood of Mr. Otto Hertz.
So the question of machinery and agriculture and the closely connected question of large and small scale production in agriculture most frequently provide the critics with the occasion to refute Marxism.
Hold on. So Americans kind of have a trouble understanding all this because it's been so remote. But back in the day, before they had machinery in like I said, this, like you need to be like digging with this big shovel. And so you needed a lot of labor to grow food. So you couldn't have people living in cities. Like there was like 90% of the people had to grow food. And under capitalism, you got this like machinery, and mostly you got this machinery in agriculture because you needed workers to work in industry and not like grow food. So it was like a cycle. And so in the early 1900s, a lot of the previous farm practices were being machinized. And under these, like people had really dumb ideas on what happens when you use a tractor instead of a horse or a cow or whatever. And Lenin's refuting this. And this is really important, in my opinion, because we really need to learn about how we get food and what the modern world is, because that gives us the context for understanding development and imperialism. So go ahead.
We shall later analyze some of the detailed data they present. For the present, let us examine their general arguments. The critics devote entire pages to arguing in detail that the use of machinery encounters greater difficulty in agriculture than in industry. And for that reason, machines are used to a smaller extent and have less significance. This is indisputable, and it was definitely shown, for example, by the same Kotsky, whose name is enough to arouse Messrs.
Bulgakov.
Yeah, okay. Bulgakov, Hertz, and Chernov to a state bordering on frenzy.
Oh yeah. This is like slightly before Lenin started to hate Kautsky. So yeah, this is one of the few times that Lenin's praises Kautsky. Okay. Don't worry, he writes 4 books, and the other half of Lenin's collected work is how much he hates Kautsky. So yeah.
I was gonna say it's kind of weird seeing Kautsky's name like that. Everything else I've seen is just not positive. Yeah.
It's basically the State and Revolution is how much I hate Kautsky.
Yeah.
But this is 1901, so this is before Kautsky had a chance to betray the International.
Okay. But this indisputable fact does not in the least controvert the other fact. The use of machinery is developing rapidly in agriculture. Also, and that is that it has a powerful transforming effect upon it. All that the critics can do is to quote unquote evade this inevitable conclusion by such profound arguments as, quote, agriculture is characterized by the domination of nature in the process of production and by the lack of human free will, end quote.
It's continued coding. Okay. This is Bulgakov.
Okay. And then instead of the uncertain and imprecise work of man, the machinery and industry, performs micrometric as well as colossal work with mathematical precision. The machine cannot do the like in the production of agricultural products because, to this day, this working instrument is not in the hands of man, but in the hands of Mother Nature.
This is no metaphor.
Yeah, I keep moving my mouse. Okay, this is no metaphor.
Okay, hold on. Okay, so yeah, this is Okay, so Bulgakov, like we know, this is really a stupid argument where, yes, machinery in agriculture is different than machinery in industry because everything in a factory is like right there and you get everything. In agriculture, of course, you have to grow it and it's dependent on land and not like it's not like you can like stack like farms upon farms upon farms. So that's the one difference. But when you read further, you'll understand. Okay, go ahead.
Indeed, it is no metaphor. It is merely an empty phrase. For everyone knows that the steam plow, the seed drill, the threshing machines, etc., make work more certain and precise. Consequently, to say, quote, cannot do the like is simply to talk nonsense. Similarly, how it can be said that machinery in agriculture, quote, cannot to any extent revolutionize production.
Where he quotes, let me do this part. Bulgakov 143-44, where he quotes the opinion of agricultural machinery experts who, however, merely refer to the relative difference between the agricultural and industrial machinery. Okay, go ahead.
Or that, quote, not only cannot machinery convert the worker into its adjunct, but that the worker still retains his previous control of the process. As feeder of the threshing machine, perhaps? Mr. Bulgakov tries to belittle the superiority of the steam plow by references to Stumpf and Kutzleb, who wrote of the ability of small-scale farming to compete with large-scale farming, as against the opinion.
The ability, Stumpf and Kutzleb believed that small-scale, like your mom and pop farmer, could actually compete with like Monsanto's. And so Lenin, of course, that's stupid because that's why all our land is owned by Monsanto right now. So Lenin's making fun of that. Okay.
As against the opinions of experts in agricultural machinery and agricultural economics, he advances arguments to the effect that steam plowing requires a special soil and extremely extensive estates.
Hold on. Okay. Lenin's notes. Hertz, with a particularly triumphant air, insists upon this, contending that the absolute judgment that the steam plow is superior to the horse under all circumstances is false. This is precisely what we call forcing an open door. So a steam plow is basically like a plow. Okay, it's like a tractor that has a steam engine in it.
Okay.
So of course it is always superior to a horse because you can always like add more fuel, and with a horse, like it'll get tired one day and stop. So of course it's always superior. So that's why this is a stupid argument, but go on.
In Mr. Bulgakov's opinion, this is not an argument against small scale farming, but against the steam plow. And that with 12-inch furrows, the work of animals is cheaper than steam power, and so forth. One could fill tomes with such arguments without, however, in the least refuting the fact that the steam plow has made extremely deep plowing possible, furrows deeper than 12 inches. Or the fact that
hold on. Deep plowing, I didn't know this until I interviewed Simon Farley in The Tragedy of Private Property. But deep plowing is very important because that allows if it's a deep plow, it means that you can just dump a lot of seed in it, and that will increase the amount of crop that comes per square mile or acre or whatever measurement. So a horse, for a horse, it's not like it just doesn't, or a cow or a buffalo doesn't have the same kind of strength as this machinery, steam power. Okay.
Or the fact that its use has rapidly developed in England in 1867. Only 135 estates were using steam plows, whereas in 1871, only over 2,000 steam plows had come into use. In Germany, the number of farms using steam plows increased from 836 in 1882 to 1696 in 1895. On the question of agricultural machinery, Mr. Bulgakov frequently cites Franz Benzing, whom he recommends as, quote, the author of a special monograph of agricultural machinery. It would be most unfair if we did not, in the present case, show how Mr. Volkov quotes his authors and how the very witnesses he calls to testify against them. In arguing that Marx's, quote, construction on the more rapid growth of constant capital as compared to the variable capital is inapplicable to agriculture. Mr. Volkov points to the need of a larger expenditure of labor power in proportion to the increase in the productivity of agriculture. And among others, quotes the calculations made by Bensing, quote, the general amount of human labor required by the various systems of economy is expressed as follows. The three-field system, 712 man days. The Norfolk crop rotation system, 1,615 man days. Crop rotation is a considerable production. Crop rotation with a considerable production of sugar beet, 3,179 man days per 60 hectares. Where's the end of that quote? Okay, there we go. The unfortunate thing, however, is that the calculation Bensing desired to prove that the role of machinery is growing. Applying these figures to German agriculture as a whole, Bensing calculates that the available agricultural workers would be sufficient to cultivate the land only on the three-field system, and that consequently the introduction of a crop rotation system would have been altogether impossible without machines. It is well known that when the threefold system prevailed, machinery is hardly utilized at all. Consequently,
hold on. Okay, so Janet, in my article, Treasury of Private Property, there's a map of the three-field system. So the three-field system, just show that. Okay, go on.
Consequently, Bensing's calculation proves the opposite of what Mr. Volkov tries to prove. This calculation shows that the growth of productivity of agriculture was necessarily accompanied by a more rapid growth of constant capital as compared with variable capital. Elsewhere, Mr. Volkov, after asserting that, quote, a radical difference exists between the role of machinery in the manufacturing industry and in agriculture, quotes the words of Mr. Bensing, quote, agricultural machinery cannot affect an unlimited increase in production in the way machines and industry do. Mr. Volkov is unlucky again. Ms. Bensing points to this by no means radical difference between agricultural and industrial machinery in the beginning of chapter 6 of his book, which is entitled The Influence of Agricultural Machinery on Gross Income. Now, after making a detailed analysis of the data relating to each special type of machine as published in agricultural literature and of his own findings obtained on the special inquiry, Bensing arrives at the following general conclusion. The increase in gross income obtained by the use of a steam plow is 10%, of a seed drill 10%, and of a threshing machine 15%. Moreover, the seed drill causes a saving of 20% seed. Only the use of potato digging machines shows a decline of 5% in gross income. Mr. Volkov's assertion that, quote, at all events, the steam plow is the only agricultural machine about which anything favorable can be said from the technical point of view is at all events refuted by the very Bensing to whom incautious Mr. Volkov here refers.
Yeah, so basically, this was a debate that was going on in Russia because Russia was still a pre-industrial society, and you had a lot of people worked, 90% of them were in the peasantry, working in the agriculture, and usually you had these people who were kind of, I guess they were they thought that you could have you know how the Republicans worship small businesses. They also worship, they had this little fetish for tenant farmers, also known as slaves. And so they were explaining why you can't not have feudal agriculture or whatever. So this is you'll see, as you read more, you'll understand.
In order to present the significance of machinery in agriculture as precisely and completely as possible, Bensing makes a number of detailed calculations of the results of farming carried on without machinery, with one machine, with two machines, and so forth. And finally, with the use of all of the important machines, including the steam plow and light railways.
Light
He
railways
found-
are like the ones that just like transport from like short distances. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. He found that in farming without the aid of machinery, gross income amounted to 69,040 marks. Expenditures 68,615 marks. Net income 425 marks, or 1.3 marks per hectare in farming. They made use of all the important machinery or machines. Growth income in farming that made use of all the important machines. Gross income amounted to 81,078 marks. Expenditure 62,551.5 marks. Net income 18,526.5 marks, or 59.76 marks per hectare, i.e., more than 40 times as much as in the first case. That is the effect of machinery alone. For the system of cultivation is assumed to have remained unchanged. It goes without saying that the use of machinery is accompanied, as Bensing's calculations show, by an enormous increase in constant capital and a diminution in variable capital.
Okay, variable capital is basically slaves. Sorry. So constant capital, like it's constant capital, as in once you buy a machine, you just kind of have it for the next 20 years. With people or slaves in Zarathustra, it would be serfs. Is that you can have like 30 of them one year, and the next year you can have them like, I don't know, hire 12. So it's variable. So the idea is that once you have the steam like powered tractor, it means that you're going to need less, I guess, people working on your plantation. And in Russia, the way this manifested itself was that every winter, like all these peasants would starve. And some of them were like shipped out like on a railway to somewhere far away to work in mines or what. Like it was it was forcible dislocation of peasants. And what would happen is that they would just like repossess whatever little land they had, and then they'd like send them far, far away to just be another kind of slave, I guess.
As one does, I guess.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's a diminution in variable capital, i.e. in the capital expended on labor power and in the number of workers employed. Mm-hmm. In short, Bensing's work entirely refutes Mr. Volkov and proves the superiority of large-scale production in agriculture, as well as the fact that the law of growth of constant capital at the expense of variable capital is applicable to agriculture.
And the thing about it is that this is like, I mean, still in many countries that we consider third world or underdeveloped or de-developed by the West, that's the problem. Children can't go to school because they have to work in the farms. And so the introduction of machinery in agriculture means if you don't need, if you used to need 30 people and now you only need 12, and 10 of them were children, now you can have those children go to school and learn how to read. So it is, but if instead you have that labor saving device, but then you have these capitalists eating up the profits, now instead of like having children go to school to learn how to read, you have these children now working in mines. And that is, I guess, the main difference between, I guess, socialism and capitalism.
Yeah, that makes sense. Only one thing makes Mr. Volkov akin to Bensing, and that is that the latter adopts the purely bourgeois point of view, completely fails to understand the contradictions inherent in capitalism, and smugly pretends not to see the machines oust the worker.
Oh my God, this is exactly what like they did during like NAFTA, right? Mm-hmm. And during NAFTA, okay, you're probably too young to remember. But basically, they were like saying NAFTA. They were like saying, "Oh yeah," like they were pretending that it was not going to oust the worker and make everyone jobless. But we knew better. But yeah, and that's why Indiana is like a dead zone.
Yeah,
it
that
used
would
to
make.
not be a dead zone. It was like well and alive like 30 years ago.
Yeah, now the only thing we get is sports stuff, really.
Yeah, it's literally a dead zone, and it's because they smugly pretended not to see machine outs the workers. Okay.
Uh,
This moderate.
what?
This moderate.
Oh, okay, cool. This moderate and methodical pupil of the German professors speaks of Marx with a hatred to watch Mr. Bulgakov, to match Mr. Bulgakov's, except that Bensing is more consistent. He calls Marx an opponent of machinery in general, in both agriculture and industry, because he says Marx distorts the facts when he talks of the harmful effects machine have on the workers and attributes all sorts of misfortunes to machines. Mr. Bulgakov's attitude toward Bensing reveals to us again and again what the critics take from the bourgeois scientists and what they pretend not to see. The nature of
Go ahead.
Oh no, you're fine.
I was just going to say that, this stuff like happens even with the TPP and things like that. Yes. Like I said, machinery in itself is neither good nor bad. What it does in agriculture is, of course, it allows fewer people to work in farms. But then it entirely depends on what happens to the people who are now not going to be working in farms. If they're going to school, if their children are going to school, or if they're in a city and they're working in a factory with like good labor conditions or whatever, it's cool. If they're like starving to death in the winter, like in Tsarist Russia, that's not so cool. So so that's the thing, is that when you only look at production and productivity, you really don't care about what happens to the workers. And so they think that Marx, and a lot of anarchists make this mistake too, where they see what the machinery does to workers and they become like anti-technology. And you literally cannot have a decent life if you don't automate some labor so that children can go to school. That's all I'm saying. Okay, go ahead.
All right. So the nature of Fritz criticism is sufficiently revealed by the following example. On page 149 of his book, he charges Kautsky with employing
I don't know what that word means.
feuilleton methods.
Okay, hold on. Let me look up this is like a kind of fancy French word, and I don't know what it means. So let's
it means cereal. According to
Chilean was an original kind of supplement attached to the political portion of the French newspapers, consisting chiefly of non-political news and gossip, art, literature, and criticism, and chronicles of the latest fashions, the epigram charades, and other literary trifles. The term feuilleton was invented by the editors of the French journal Des Débats, Julien Louis Geoffroy and Bertin the Elder in okay. So he thinks, I guess it's gossipy. Okay, whatever. Okay. Unimportant, gossipy. Okay.
Oh, okay. I at least figured out how to say it.
How do you say it?
Feuilleton.
Feuilleton. Okay, that's I have not figured out how to say it, so let me figure this out.
Yeah, I just used I have my Firefox set up to translate everything, since I spend so much time on like Filipino websites and Chinese websites and stuff. But that, and then like the Chinese websites, they don't come through if you have the English translation part on my end. Like they get blocked.
Yeah. But with Chinese websites, I just use WeChat to translate. WeChat automatically translates for you.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, that sounds a lot easier than my Firefox Simple Translate.
Yeah. Just use the WeChat browser if you have WeChat for Chinese websites.
Okay.
And I'm precisely learning Russian for that. Like it's been a gold mine. So let us continue.
He charges Kautsky with employing feuilleton methods. And on page 150, he, quote, refutes the assertion that large-scale production is superior to small-scale production in regards to the use of machinery. by the following arguments. 1, machinery is accessible also to small farmers through the medium of cooperative societies. That, if you please, is supposed to refute the fact that machinery is used on a larger scale on big farms. On the question as to who has greater access to the benefits of cooperative organization, we shall have a separate talk with Hertz in our second essay. 2, David is shown in Socialiste Monatschefte.
I think it's Socialistisch Monatschefte. Okay.
Yeah, that.
Some German. Okay.
That the use of machinery on small farms, quote, is extensive and is rapidly increasing. That seed drills are frequently to be found even on very small farms. The same applies to mowers and other machines. But if the reader turned to David's article, he will see that the author takes the absolute figures of the numbers of farms using machinery and not the percentage of those farms in relation to the total number of farms in a given category, as Kotsky does, of course.
This is so weird. Again, okay. So we'll put that. I'll put this table. So basically, what he's doing is he's saying, okay, we have 10,000 farms in Germany, and we use 50 tractors. But what David's not doing is looking at what kind of farms are using those 50 tractors. And eventually you'll realize that all of them are like mega farms that have like over 10,000 acres or hectares of land. And they're using the machinery, and they are basically undercutting. And because they're using the machinery, they're undercutting the labor. And then you're making these small farmers go out of business. And then these mega farms are growing bigger and bigger, is what you'll note. It is basically what's happening. And we will show the table. Okay.
So it says, let us compare those figures, which are for the whole of Germany for 1895.
Okay. So now just skip this because we will show the table. Confirmation.
Confirmation indeed of the statement of David and Hertz that seeding machines and mowers are, quote, frequently found even on very small farms. And if Hertz draws the conclusion that, quote, judged by statistics...
Okay. So basically the seedlings, so there are about 3 million farms in Germany, and small farms, and seedling machines are only found in 214, which is not frequent. If you have 214 divided by 3 million, that's totally not frequent.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Where was I? Confirmation indeed of the statement of David and Hertz that seeding machines and mowers are, quote, frequently found even on very small farms. And if Hertz draws the conclusion that, quote, judged by statistics, Koski's assertion will not stand criticism, who is it that really employs the Feuilleton methods?
Yeah, 214 out of 3 million is not frequent.
Not at all.
Okay.
It should be pointed out as a curiosity that whereas the critics deny the superiority of large-scale farming in regards to the use of machinery, and deny the overwork and underconsumption caused by this fact in small farming, they outrageously contradict themselves when compelled to deal with the actual facts of the situation, and when they forget their principal task to refute orthodox Marxism. Thus, in volume 11 of his book, wait, is that volume 11 or volume 2? Volume 2. Page 115, Mr. Volkoff says, large-scale farming always works with greater capital intensity than small-scale farming, and therefore naturally gives preference to the mechanical factors of production over live labor power.
Which is exactly what Marx said.
Yeah. What a strange person this man is. That Mr. Volkoff, as a critic, should follow Messrs. Struve and Tugan-Baranovsky.
Hold on. It's Tugan-Baranovsky.
Tugan-Baranovsky in their inclination towards vulgar political economy by contrasting mechanical, quote, factors of production to live factors is indeed quite natural. But is it natural that he should so incautiously deny the superiority of large-scale farming? On concentration and agricultural production, Mr. Volkoff can find no other words with which to express himself then the mystical law of concentration, and so forth. He comes up against the figures for England, and they show that a tendency towards the concentration of farms was observed from the 50s to the end of the 70s. Small subsistence farms combined into larger farms, writes Mr. Volkov. This consolidation of land was by no means the result of the conflict between large-scale and small-scale production, but of a conscious striving on the part of the landlords to increase their rents by combining several farms which provided them with very low rents into large farms capable of paying them larger rents.
So basically, they evicted. Like I said, we'll link to the article Simone Farley wrote about the tragedy of private property. But they mass evicted all these people from their lands and stole their lands. Basically, yeah.
Classy.
Okay.
Super classy.
Winston Churchill's family stole I can't even explain how much they stole. They stole 3 counties worth of land.
Of course, you said Winston Churchill?
Chill's family.
Oh.
Winston Churchill wasn't around back then, but his family did steal a lot of land. Okay.
Okay. I was making sure I heard that right. Yeah, no, Winston Churchill's, it doesn't surprise me that his family was bad if he was such an ass.
Yeah, he's a horrible, yeah, go
on. Let's see.
We are too.
So we are to understand from this, not conflict between large scale and small scale farming, but the elimination of the latter because it is less remunerative. Since farming is established on a capitalist basis, it is indisputable that within certain limits, large scale capitalist farming possesses undoubted advantages over small scale capitalist farming. If this is indisputable, why the clamor? Why did Mr. Bolkoff cry murder against Kotsky, who begins this chapter?
The really funny thing is in Nachala is a magazine for Russian entrepreneurs of the day. And Nachala means let's begin. It has such a pretentious name. Okay.
Why did Mr. Bolkoff cry murder against Kotsky, who begins this chapter on large scale and small scale production in his agrarian question with the statement, the more capitalistic agriculture becomes, the more qualitative becomes the difference in technique between large scale and small scale production. But not only the period of prosperity of English agriculture, also the period of crisis leads to conclusions unfavorable to small scale farming. The reports of commissions published during recent years with astonishing persistence assert that the crisis has most severely affected the small farmers. One report dealing with small owners says, quote, their homes are worse than the average laborers' cottages. No, their homes are worse than the average laborers' cottages. All of them work astonishingly hard and for many more hours than the laborers. And many of them say that their material conditions are not so good as those of the latter, that they do not live as well and rarely eat fresh meat. The yeomen, burdened with mortgages, were the first to go under. They stint themselves in all things as only few laborers do. The small farmers keep going as long as they are able to avail themselves of the unpaid labor of the members of the families. It is hardly necessary to add that the living conditions of the small farmers are far worse than those of the laborers. We have quoted these passages so that the reader may judge the correctness of the following conclusion drawn by Mr. Bulgakov. The severe ruination of the farms, which had survived until the epoch of agrarian crisis, indicates merely that in such circumstances, small producers succumb more quickly than large producers, and nothing more. It is utterly impossible to draw from this any general conclusion concerning the economic viability of small farms. And for in that epoch, the whole of English agriculture was insolvent.
Yeah, go ahead.
Isn't this priceless? And in the chapter dealing with the general conditions of development of peasant farming, Mr. Bolkoff even generalizes his remarkable method of reasoning in the following manner. Quote, a sudden drop in prices has a serious effect on all forms of production, but peasant production, having least capital at its disposal, is naturally less stable than large-scale production. which does not in the slightest affect the question of its general viability. Thus, in capitalist society, enterprises have less capital at their enterprises having less capital at their disposal are less capable, but that does not affect their general viability.
Yeah. Go on.
Hertz is not more consistent in his reasoning. He refutes Koski in the manner described above, but in discussing America, he admits the superiority of large-scale farming in that country, which permits the employment of machinery on a far larger scale than our parcelized farming permits. He admits that the European peasant, employing antiquated, routine methods of production, frequently tolls for a crust of bread like a laborer without striving for anything else or anything better. Hertz admits generally that small-scale production employs a relatively larger amount of labor than large-scale production. He could well communicate to Mr. Bulgakoff the data on the increase in yield resulting from the introduction of the steam plow. The natural concomitant.
I don't know what that word means. Hold on, let me figure that out. The natural concomitant. I always learn like new perfect words like gendarme. Instead of the police, like a gendarme. Okay, a concomitant is a condition accompanying or coexisting. A concomitant is something that accompanies something else. Concomitants, a Christian doctrine, concomitants in geometry. So in statistics, a concomitant, a statistic that arises when one sorts of members of a random sample according to the corresponding values of another random sample. So two things that occur, that come together, like that occur at the same time. Okay. Simultaneously. Okay.
The natural concomitant of our critics' faulty theoretical reasoning on the significance of agricultural machinery is their helpless repetition of the views of downright reactionary agrarians who are opposed to machinery, downright reactionary agrarians who are opposed to machinery. Hertz, it is true, still hesitates on this delicate point. In speaking of the difficulties in the way of introducing machinery in agriculture, he observes, quote, "The opinion is expressed that so much free time is left in the winter that hand threshing is more profitable."
Free time? Okay, go on.
Apparently, Hertz, with the logic peculiar to him, is inclined to draw the conclusion that this is an argument not against small production, not against the capitalist obstacles to the production of machinery, but against machinery. It is not surprising that Mr. Bulgakoff chides Hertz for being, quote, too closely tied to the opinion of his party. The Russian professor, of course, is above such degrading ties and proudly declares, quote, "I am sufficiently free from the prejudice so widespread, particularly in Marxist literature, according to which every machine must be regarded as progress." Unfortunately, the flight of imagination revealed in this magnificent piece of reasoning finds no correspondence in concrete conclusions. The steam threshing machine, writes Mr. Bulgakoff, which deprives very many workers of winter occupation, spelt for the laborers an undoubtedly serious evil, uncompensated by technical advantages. Goltz, incidentally, points this out and even gives expression to a utopian desire. The desire to restrict the use of threshing machines, particularly steam threshers, in order, he adds to improve the conditions of agricultural laborers as well as to reduce immigration and migration.
By migration, Golt in all probability means movement into towns.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. I was trying to figure out if that was a citation or not.
Oh, no, that's a clarification. Go ahead.
Okay. We shall remind the reader that this Goltzian idea was also noted by Kotsky in his agrarian question. It will not be without interest, therefore, to compare the attitude of the narrow orthodox Marxist, steeped in Marxist prejudices, with that of the latter-day critic, who has excellently assimilated the whole spirit of criticism towards a concrete question of economics, the significance of machines, and politics not to be restricted. Kotsky says that Goltz ascribes a particularly harmful influence to the threshing machine. It deprives the agricultural laborers of their principal winter occupation, drives them into the towns, and intensifies the depopulation of the countryside.
Hold on. That's the funny thing is that capitalists do this all the time. It's not that the machine is doing it, it's the governmental policy. So what if the government had a jobs guarantee and in the wintertime they could come and, I don't know, go work, I don't know, knitting sweaters, God knows. Like there's always something, or they could just be paid for the whole year because they worked so hard during the summer. Like there are thousands of things, but it's funny how they always blame the machinery and not the government policy.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Kotsky says that Goltz ascribes a particularly harmful influence to the threshing machines. It deprives the agricultural laborers of principal winter occupation, drives them into the towns, intensifies the depopulation of the countryside. Goltz proposes to restrict the use of the threshing machines, and Kotsky proposes this ostensibly in the interest of agricultural laborers, but in fact in the interest of the landlords, for whom, as Goltz himself says, the loss resulting from such restriction will be amply compensated, if not immediately, then in the future by the larger number of workers they will be able to obtain in the summertime. Fortunately, continues Kotsky, this conservative friendship of the laborer is nothing more nor less than reactionary utopianism. The threshing machine is of too great an immediate advantage, or for the landlord to be too great an immediate advantage for the landlord to be induced to abandon its use for the sake of profits. In the future, just one more time on that. The threshing machine is of too great an immediate advantage for the landlord to be induced to abandon its use for the sake of profits in the future. And so the thresher will continue to perform its revolutionary work. It will continue to drive the agricultural laborers into the towns, and as a result will become a powerful instrument for the raising of wages in the rural districts, on the one hand, and for the further development of the agricultural machine industry on the other. Mr. Bulgakov's attitude towards the problem is presented by a social democrat and by an agrarian is very characteristic. It is an example in miniature of the position all the contemporary critics occupy midway through the party of the proletariat and the party of the bourgeoisie. The critic, of course, is not so narrow-minded and not so banal as to adopt the point of view of the class struggle and the revolutionizing of social relationships by capitalism. On the other hand, however, although our critic has grown wiser, the recollection of the time when he was young and foolish and shared the prejudices of Marxism prevents him from adopting in its entirety the program of his new comrade, the agrarian, who quite reasonably and consistently passes from the conclusion that machinery is harmful for the whole of agriculture to the desire to prohibit its use. And our good critic finds himself in the position of Buridan's ass. Hold
on. I think this is a reference to some like a Russian fairy tale. So he means a donkey. Of course, let's check this out. It's a paradox. Okay, let me read this. It's an illustration of a paradox in philosophy in the concept of free will. It refers to a hypothetical situation wherein a donkey that is equally hungry and thirsty is precisely placed midway between a stack of hay and a pail of water. Since the paradox assumes that the donkey will always go to whichever it is close, it will die of both hunger and thirst since it cannot make any rational decision between the hay and the water. Okay, this sounds like a stupid paradox. Okay. Okay.
Between the two bundles of hay. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, he has lost all understanding of the class struggle and is now capable of saying that machinery is harmful for, quote, the whole of agriculture, forgetting that the whole of modern agriculture is conducted mainly by entrepreneurs who are concerned only about their profit. He has so far forgotten the, quote, years of his youth when he was a Marxist that he now raises the extremely absurd question as to whether the technical advantages of machinery will compensate for its harmful effects upon the laborers, produced not by the steam thresher alone, but by the steam plow, the mower, seed sifter, etc. He even fails to see that, in fact, the agrarian wants to enslave the laborer further, both in the winter and in summer. On the other hand, he vaguely recalls the obsolete, quote, dogmatic prejudice that prohibiting machinery is utopian. Poor Mr. Bulgakov. Will he manage to extricate himself from this unpleasant situation?
We don't know.
Huh?
No, I was just saying, we don't know. Go on. It was just yeah.
Oh. It is interesting to note that in trying in every way to belittle the significance of agricultural machinery and even making use of the law of diminishing returns, our critics have forgotten to mention or deliberately refrained from mentioning the new technological revolution with which electrical engineering is preparing in agriculture. But Kotsky, who according to the extremely unfair judgment of Mr. P. Maslov, quote, committed a serious mistake in completely failing to indicate the course taken by the development of the productive forces of agriculture, pointed to the significance of electricity in agriculture as far back as 1899. Today, the symptoms of the approaching technological revolution are much more distinct. Attempts are made to elucidate theoretically the significance of electricity in agriculture.
So the next part is practical landlord farmers.
Okay. Practical landlord farmers are describing their experiments in the application of electricity. Pringsheim cites work by Adolf Sufferheld, who describes the experiments on his own landlords to establish central power stations and to organize the mass production.
Hold on. You skipped a line. The landlords see in electricity a means of making agriculture once more remunerative.
Okay, sorry about that. They call upon the government and the landlords to establish central power stations and to organize the mass production of electricity for farmers. Last year, a work was published by Königsberg.
Don't worry about it. This is just a citation.
Oh. Nope. Well, that's the end of that then.
Okay. So then it goes Pringsheim. Okay,
so Pringsheim makes what, in our opinion, is a very true observation that in its general technological and perhaps even economic level, modern agriculture is at a stage of development which more than anything resembles the stage of industry Marx described as manufacture. The predominance of hand labor and simple cooperation, the sporadic employments of machines, the relatively small extent of production, if we consider, for example, the total annual volume of products sold by a single enterprise, the relatively limited market for the part, the connection between large and small scale production, the latter like the handcraftsman in his relationship to the big master manufacturer supplies the former with labor power, or else the former buys up the self-finished articles from the latter. Thus, the big farmer buys beets, cattle, etc. from the small farmers. All these are symptoms of the fact that agriculture has not yet reached the stage of real large-scale machine industry in the Marxian sense. In agriculture, there is no system of machines as yet linked to one productive mechanism. Of course, this comparison must not be carried too far. On one hand, agriculture possesses certain peculiar features that cannot possibly be removed if we leave aside the extremely remote and problematic possibility of producing protein and feed in laboratories.
Go ahead.
Owing to these peculiarities, large-scale machine production will never manifest in agriculture all the features it possesses in industry. On the other hand, even in the manufacture stage of development, large-scale production in industry reached predominance and considerable technological superiority over small-scale production. For a long time, the small producer tried to counteract this superiority by the lengthened working day and curtailed consumption, which are so characteristic of the handicraftsman and of the modern small peasant. The predominance of hand labor in the manufacture stage enabled the small laborer to hold his own over time by, quote, heroic measures such as these. But those who were deceived by this and talked about the viability of the handicraftsman, even as our contemporary critics talk of the viability of the peasant, very soon found themselves refuted by the temporary tendency which paralyzed the universal law of technological stagnation. Let us all recall, for instance, the Russian investors into the handicraft
Investigators.
Investigators. The Russian investigators into the handicraft weaving industry in Moscow, gubernia, in the 70s. As far as cotton weaving was concerned, they said, the hand weaver was doomed. The machine had triumphed. The handicraft silk weaver, however, may still hold his own for a time, the machinery being still far from perfect. 2 decades have passed, and machinery has driven the small producer from still another of his last refuges. That's telling those who have ears to hear and eyes to see that the economist must always look forward towards technological progress or else be left behind at once. For he who will not look ahead and turns his back on history, there is not and cannot be any middle path. Writers who, like Hertz, in treating of competition between small and large scale production in agriculture, ignored electrical engineering, must start their investigation all over again. Aptly remarked Pringsheim. Oh, okay. So they must start their investigation all over. Aptly remarked Pringsheim. Which remark applies it's with still greater force to Mr. Bulgakov's 2-volume work.
Yep.
So electricity is cheaper than steam power. It is more easily divisible into small units. It can be more easily transmitted over very long distances. Machinery powered by electricity runs more smoothly and precisely, and for the reason it is more convenient to use it in threshing, plowing, milking, cutting, fodder, etc. Koski describes one of the Hungarian latifundia.
A latifundia is like a plantation, an extremely large farm owned by like a landlord.
Okay.
Or an aristocracy. Go ahead.
In which electricity is transmitted from a central station in all directions to the remote parts of the estate and is used for running agricultural machinery, for chopping mangles, for raising water, for lighting, etc., etc. In order to pump 300 hectoliters a day from a well 29 meters deep into a reservoir 10 meters high, and in order to prepare fodder for 240 cows, 200 calves, 60 oxen and horses, i.e. for chopping mangles, etc., 2 pairs of horses were required in the winter and 1 pair in the summer at a cost of 1,500 gulden.
That was the Hungary's old currency. Okay. Austria-Hungarian. Go ahead.
Okay. The gulden. I'm going to remember that so I can look into that later. Now the horses have been replaced by a 3 and a 5 horsepower. Horsepower motor costing together 700 gulden to maintain, which represents a saving of 800 gulden. Matt calculates the cost of a horse workday at 3 marks, but if the horse is replaced by electricity, the cost is 40 to 75 pfennigs, 4 to 7 times cheaper. If in 50 years or more from now, he says 1,175,000.
1,750,000 of the horses used in German agriculture were supplanted by electricity. In 1895, 2,600,000 horses, 1 million oxen, and 2,300,000 cows were used for field work in German agriculture, of which 1,400,000 horses and 400 oxen were used on farms exceeding 20 hectares in area. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I have a really bad problem with numbers.
Okay. Let me read the whole paragraph. Let me read the next sentence too. Okay, in that case. Expenses would be reduced from 1,000,000,003 marks to 261 million marks, i.e. by 742 million marks. Now go ahead.
Thank you so much. An enormous area of land now utilized for raising cattle feed could then be turned to the production of food for the improvement of the food of the workers, whom Mr. Bolkoff tries so much to scare with the prospect of the diminution of gifts of nature, the grain problem, and so forth. Max strongly recommends the uniting of agriculture with an industry for the permanent exploitation of electricity.
Okay, go ahead.
He recommends the cutting of a Missourian canal to provide power for 5 power stations, which would distribute electricity to farmers within a radius of 20 to 25 kilometers. He recommends the use of peat for the same purpose and demands the association of farmers only in cooperative association with industry and big capital as it possible to make our branch of industry profitable once again. Of course, the employment of new methods of production will encounter many difficulties. It will not proceed in a straight line, but in a zigzag fashion. However,
hold on 1 second. What's up, Molly? Oh, okay. You stay here. Relax. I don't know. Enjoy yourself. Watch some TV and make some coffee. Okay.
But in a zigzag fashion, however, that the employment of new methods will take place, that the revolution in agriculture is inevitable, can hardly be doubted. The substitution of electric motors for a majority of draft animals, rightly says Pringsheim, means opening up the possibility of machine system in agriculture. What cannot be achieved by steam power will certainly be achieved by electrical engineering, namely the advancement of agriculture from the old manufacture stage to modern large-scale production. We shall not dilate upon the enormous victory the introduction of electrical engineering in agriculture will represent, and partly already represents, for large-scale production. It is too obvious to require emphasis. It will be better to see which modern farms contain the rudiments of this machine system that will be set in motion by a central power station. Before the machine system can be introduced, it is first of all necessary to test various kinds of machines, to conduct experiments with many combinations of machines. The information we require can be found in the returns of the German agricultural census of June 14th, 1895. We have figures showing the numbers of farms in each category that use their own or hired machines. Mr. Bolkoff, when citing some of these figures on page 114, volume 2, erroneously takes them to apply to the number of machines used. In passing, it may be said that the statistics on the number of farms using machines, their own or hired, naturally bring out the superiority of large-scale farming to a smaller extent than is really the case. Big farmers have their own machines more often than small farmers, who are obliged to pay exorbitant prices for the higher machines.
Oh, and it's kind of ironic because that's exactly what they had to do with horses and kulaks. But go on, or cows or whatever. Okay.
The data relate to the use either of machines in general or of a certain kind of machine, so that we are not able to determine how many machines the farms in each group use. But if for each group we compute the number of farms using each separate kind of machine, we shall obtain the number of cases in which agricultural machines of all kinds are used. The following table represents the data drawn up in this manner and shows how the ground is being prepared for the machine system in agriculture.
Okay, we'll put up the table and let me read the next section because it has a lot of numbers. In small farms under 5 hectares, these comprise more than 3/4 of the total in this group, 4,100,000 out of 5,500,000 or 75.5%. But they account for only 5 million hectares or out of a total of 32,500,000 hectares or 15.6%. The number of cases in which agricultural machines of any type are used, we have included dairy machinery, is quite insignificant. Of the medium farms between 5 to 20 hectares, fewer than half use machines generally, while the number of instances showing use of agricultural machines represent only 56 per 100 farms. Only under a large-scale capitalist production do we see the majority of the farms from 3/4 to 9/10 using machinery, the beginning of the establishment of a machine system. On every farm, there is more than one case of use of machinery. This means that several machines are used on a single farm. For example, farms over 100 hectares use about 4 machines each, or 352%, as compared with 94% of machines used in generals. Of the 572 latifundia, farms of 1,000 hectares or over, 555 use machines, and the number of cases in which machines were used is 2,800, i.e., each farm used 5 machines. It is clear from this which farms are preparing the ground for the electrical revolution and which will mostly take advantage of it, i.e., a wealthy, and that's why everything now is owned by Monsanto. Sorry. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And I hope you can come back again in the next year to read some more Lenin, because that was fun.
Absolutely.
Okay. With that, I have to go now because my Russian class is in 8 minutes. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Online, I could be. Oh, hi. Now I am. So I hope you guys had an enjoyable time. Thank you for. Okay. What's up, Janet? Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. So we shall, unless, let me quickly look at any comments or not. Thank you. Thanks for being here today. It made
Yeah, you should be
all live.
You should be fine.
I'm sorry, what did you say? I'm sorry, what did you say? Okay, it doesn't matter. Thank you, Will, for being here today. Also, because that's why we're here. We knew that not everyone is happy and cheerful around Christmas. Hey, Caboose, welcome back. Okay, so feel free to ask questions along the way. But like I said, this is going to be the how long I read will be a function of how many super chats I get. So the more super chats I get, the longer I'm likely to read and not get tired. I kind of forgot where we were. Let me figure this out. We started life in London. Vanya and Manya. That's where we ended. Okay. So without further, okay. So we are reading this book. I forgot how to pronounce the word reminiscences or whatever. I somebody needs to teach me how to pronounce this word again, but whatever. I will start with this. Okay. The Workers' Committee was chiefly to carry on the economic struggle, while the Intellectuals Committee was to handle matters of high policy. This high policy was, by the way, of a very insignificant kind. It was more like liberal policy than revolutionary. This structure was a result of economism. The defeated in principle, it still held a secure footing locally. The Iskra group estimated this structure at its true worth. Vladimir Ilyich played an important part in the struggle for a proper structure of organizations. His letter to Yerema, better known as Letter to a Comrade, of which more anon, played an exceptionally important role in organizing the party. Hold on, let me see if I can find Letter to a Comrade. I probably can. Open Letter to a Comrade. Lenin. Okay. But no, it looks like I did not get the right one because it looks really, like, he wrote it in 1921, which would not be when this is going on. So next week I'll find the right letter to the comrade. Oh, Yandex auto translate. So if you need an auto translation, go to Yandex. Use an Yandex browser, and it will auto translate the video. I know at least to Russian. I don't know if it auto translates to any other language, but using Yandex, Yandex, and they're not paying me. I just know that they do. So if you need an auto translate into any language, I don't know which languages they're capable of auto translating, but Yandex browsers can live translate videos. Played an exceptionally important role in organizing the party. It helped to strengthen the worker element in the party and ensure the workers' active cooperation in deciding all urgent questions of policy. It broke down the wall which the Rabotchiadiala adherents had raised between the workman and the intellectual. The winter of 1902-1903 saw a desperate struggle of tendencies within organizations. The Iskraists steadily won ground, but sometimes they were thrown out. Oh, thank you so much. Merry Christmas to you, too many. 22 many. Oh, thank you. It's so sweet. Okay. This means I'm going to read for a while. Vladimir Ilyich directed the struggle of the Iskraists and warned them against the too vulgar interpretation of centralism. He combated the tendency to regard every importance of live, independent activity as amateurish. This work of Vladimir Ilyich's, which so profoundly influenced the qualitative structure of the committees, is little known to the present generation. Yet it was this that stamped the character of our party and laid the foundation of its present organizations. The economists of Rabotchiadialo trend were strongly opposed to this struggle, as a result of which they had lost their influence and resented taking orders from abroad. Comrade Krasnuka arrived from St. Petersburg on August 6 to discuss organizational questions. His password was, "Have you read number 47 of the Citizen?" Citizen became his party's sobriquet afterwards. Vladimir Ilyich had long talks with him about the St. Petersburg organization and its structure. Others who took part in these talks were P.A. Krasikov, alias musician, hairpin, Ignat, and Pankrat. Boris Noskov. The London Citizen went to Geneva to talk with Plekhanov and get properly iskrified. A week or two later, received a letter from Yerema giving his views on how the work ought to be organized locally. It was not clear from this letter whether Yerema was a single propagandist or a group of propagandists, but that was unimportant. Vladimir Ilyich began to think out a reply. The reply expanded into the pamphlet "Letter to a Comrade on Our Organizational Tasks." It was hectographed and distributed, and later in 1903 printed illegally by the Siberian Committee. Babushkin, who had escaped from prison in Ekaterinoslav, arrived in London, at the beginning of September of 1902. He and Gorovets had been helped to escape and cross the frontier by gymnasium schoolboys. Whoa. Oh my God. Schoolboys in Tsarist Russia were like totally, whoa, awesome. Like they're like middle school, but these are like middle school boys. Whoa, who had dyed his hair. It turned crimson after a while and attracted general attention. When he came to us, he had crimson hair. In Germany, he fell into the hands of commission agents and nearly got himself shipped off to America. This seems very interesting because the myth that they like to tell us is that everyone came to America voluntarily. They'd never tell us about apparently commission agents who ship people off against their will. I don't know how many there were, but we need to check this. It's very interesting. Okay. We fixed him up in the commune where he lived throughout his stay in London. Babushkin had developed politically beyond recognition. He was now an experienced revolutionary with a mind of his own, a man familiar with all kinds of working class organizations who, being himself a worker, had nothing to learn in the matter of approaching the workers. When he first came to Sunday school several years before, he had been quite an inexperienced young man. I remember the following episode. At first, he was in Lydia Knipovich's group. They were having a Russian lesson, as in learning how to read lesson. And quoting a grammatical example, Babushkin wrote on the board, "There will be a strike in our factory." Linda called him aside after the lesson, told him off. "If you want to be a revolutionary, you must try not to show off that you are one. You must be able to control yourself." Lydia, sorry, not Linda. Babushkin had written, but afterwards regarded Lydia as his best friend and often consulted her and speaking to her in a tone that he used with no one else. At that time, Plekhanov arrived in London. A meeting was arranged with Babushkin. Russian affairs were discussed, and Babushkin had opinions of his own and stood up for them very firmly, so much that Plekhanov was impressed and began to study him more closely about his future work in Russia. Though he spoke to no one but Vladimir Ilyich, whom he was particularly intimate. I remember another small but rather characteristic incident. A couple of days after Babushkin's arrival, we were astonished on coming into the communal room to find how tidy it was. All the litter had been cleared away, newspapers spread on the table, the floor had been swept. We learned that Babushkin had tidied up, and he said, "The Russian intellectual is so untidy. He needs a servant to tidy up for him. He can't do it himself," said Babushkin. He soon went back to Russia. We did not see him anymore. He was seized in Siberia in 1906 with the consignment of arms and was shot with other comrades over an open grave. Yeah, and Lenin actually writes a tribute to him, like later, to Babushkin. Yeah. Another group of Iskra comrades who had escaped from prison in Kiev and arrived in London while Babushkin was still there. There was Bauman, Krochmal, and Blumenfeld. The latter had been caught on the frontier with a trunk of literature and addresses and taken to Kiev prison. Valach, alias Litvinov and Daddy, and Tsarsis, alias Friday. We knew that a group of prisoners had been preparing to break jail in Kiev. Deutsch, an expert in breaking jail who had just arrived, declared that it was impossible. He had first-hand knowledge of the conditions in Kiev prisons. Nevertheless, the prisoners succeeded in making their escape. Ropes, grappling irons, passports were smuggled into the prison. During the walk in the prison yard, the guard and the warder were gagged and bound, and the prisoners climbed over the wall. The last one in the queue, Sylvan, who was holding the water, failed to make good his escape. Several hectic days followed. In the middle of August, we received a letter from the editors of Yuzhny Rabochi, which means Yuj, a southern worker, a popular illegal organ of the workers, reported arrests in the South, saying that they wish to establish close contact with Iskra and Zarya organization. They also declared their solidarity with our views. This, of course, was a great step towards uniting our forces. In their next letter, however, the Yuzhny Rabochu expressed disapproval with the sharp tone of Iskra's polemics with the liberals. Then they went on to speak about the literary group of Yuzhny Rabochu, continuing to preserve its independence and so on. Obviously, they were keeping something back. The Samara comrades ascertained by means of negotiation that Yuzhny Rabochi stand was characterized by the underestimation of the peasants' movement, dissatisfaction at the sharp tone of the polemics with the liberals, and the desire to remain independent and publish their own popular organ. At the beginning of October, Trotsky, who had escaped from Siberia, arrived in London. He considered himself an Iskra. Vladimir Ilyich asked him many questions about his impressions of Russian work. Trotsky was being called to Russia, but Vladimir Ilyich thought he ought to stay abroad to learn things and help in the work of Iskra. Trotsky went to live in Paris. Oh my God, thank you so much, Norville Rogers. We really appreciate it. Spasiba. We really needed it. Interesting. Okay. The new arrival was Ekaterina Alexandrova Jacques, who had come from exile in Olekma. She had been a prominent Narodovalyet, and thus had left its mark upon her. Unlike our enthusiastic gushing girls such as Dimka, she was highly self-possessed. She was an Iskraist now, and what she said carried weight. Vladimir Ilyich held the old revolutionaries of Narodnaya Volya with great respect. When Alexandrova arrived, his attitude towards her was not uninfluenced by the fact that she was a former Narodovalyet who had joined the Iskra group. As for me, I looked up to her. Before becoming a social democrat, I had gone to the Alexandrovs, Alminskys, to ask to be given a study circle of workers, as in teaching workers how to read. I remember being greatly impressed by simple furniture, the stacks of statistical manuals piled up everywhere, and the figure of Mikhail Stepanovich sitting at the far end of the room, and the fervent speeches of Ekaterina, his wife, who urged me to join the Narodnaya Volya. I told Vladimir Ilyich this before her arrival. I became one of our current enthusiasms. She became one of our current enthusiasms. Iskra means spark. It is a magazine that Vladimir Ilyich started, and he did it in all. It was an all Russia newspaper, Iskra, and I'm gonna have to look away from the notifications because it seems like some Twitch people have come. Yeah. Sometimes you get the worst trolls in Twitch from Twitch. Oh, okay. Vladimir, on detecting him, some valuable trait, he would fairly pounce on. Wait. I told Ekaterina Alexandrova left London for Paris. She did not prove to be a very staunch Iskraist. The web of opposition against Lenin's grasping tactics at the Second Party Congress was spun not without her assistance. Later, she was on the Conciliatory Central Committee. Afterwards, she quit the political arena. Of the other comrades from Russia who visited London, I remember Boris Goldman, Adele, and Dalivo Dabravalsky Dept. Boris Goldman back in St. Petersburg, had been a technical worker of the organization engaged in printing leaflets for the League of Struggle. A great waver he was at the time an Iskra.
Asha?
Yeah.
Asha, hold on 1 second. I don't know, the video froze on the other end, and I don't know why, because I don't know if they can still hear you.
The video froze. Okay.
Asha? Okay, I think it's done. I think it's all right.
Okay.
All right. Sorry.
Okay. Dalivo was an amazingly quiet man. He used to sit as quiet as a mouse. Shortly after returning to St. Petersburg, he went mad, and then, when half cured, he shot himself. The underground in those days was a hard life. Not everyone could stand it. Intensive preparations for the Congress went forward all the winter. An organizing committee for preparing the Congress was set up in 1902, consisting of the members of the Yuzhny Rabochuchi, the Northern Union of the Krasnuka, I. Radchenko, Krasikov, Legnik, and Kryzhanovsky. This is a hard name to pronounce. Kryzhanovsky. The Bund did not join until afterwards. The word organization was very much to the point. Without the OC, organization, oh my God, she's using the word OC, organizing committee. OG is the original gangster. What if she uses it? It would have not been possible to call the Congress. The complicated task of organizationally and ideologically coordinating bodies which were either newly formed or still in the process of formation and arranging for representations on a Congress to be held abroad and carried out under extremely difficult conditions of the police regime. Actually, the entire work of communicating with the OC devolved on Vladimir Ilyich. Patrisov was ill. London's fogs did not agree with his lungs. He was taking medical treatment somewhere. Martov found London and its secluded life trying, and he had gone to Paris and stayed there. Deutsch, an old member of the Emancipation of Labor group who had escaped from exile, was to have lived in London too. The group had great hopes for him as an organizer. Wait till Zhenka, Deutsch's alias, comes, Vera Zasulich said. He will organize contacts with Russia splendidly. Plekhanov and Axelrod relied on him too, hoping that he would represent them in Iskra and keep an eye on things. When Deutsch arrived, however, we found that being cut off so many years from Russia had left its mark on him. He was quite unfit to handle contacts with Russia and was unfamiliar with new conditions. His hunger for companionship had led him to join the League of Russian Revolutionary Social Democrats abroad. He established wide contacts with Russian colonies abroad and shortly left for Paris. Vera Zasulich resided permanently in London. She listened eagerly to stories about work in Russia, but was herself incapable of handling contacts with Russia. Vladimir Ilyich bore the brunt of all this work. Correspondence with Russia frayed his nerves badly. Those weeks and months of waiting for answers to his letters, constantly expecting the whole thing to fall through, that constant state of uncertainty and suspense were anything but congenial to Vladimir Ilyich's characters. His letters to Russia were full of requests to write punctually. We beg you again most earnestly and insistently write to us more often and more fully. Answer us without fail immediately you receive our letter, or at least drop us a line that you have received it. His letters were full of requests to act promptly. He did not sleep at night after receiving a letter from Russia saying that Sonia is silent as the dead, or that Zarin did not join the committee in time, or that we have no contacts with the old woman. I shall never forget those sleepless nights. It was Vladimir Ilyich's passionate desire to create a united solid party, merging into one all the detached group whose attitude to the party was based on personal sympathies or antipathies. He dreamt of a party in which there would be no artificial barriers, national ones included. Hence the struggle with the Bund. Majority of the Bund at that time adopted the standpoint of Rabochia Dialo. That's good. And no more Twitch people kind of there to irritate me. Okay. Whew. I forgot where we were. Vladimir Ilyich had no doubts that if the Bund joined the party and kept its autonomy only in purely national matters, it would inevitably come to the line with the party. But the Bund wanted independence on all questions. its leaders talked about the political party of their own, unconnected with the RSDLP, Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, and agreed to affiliate only on a federal basis. Such tactics were disastrous to the Jewish proletariat. The latter could never win by itself. Only by joining with the proletariats of all of Russia could it become a force. Bundists failed to understand that. So Iskra waged a fierce struggle with the Bund. It was a fight for unity, fight for solidarity of the working class movement. The whole editorial board was in it, but the Bundists knew who knew that the most ardent champion for the struggle for unity was Vladimir Ilyich. The Emancipation of Labor group once more raised the question of moving to Geneva. This time, Vladimir Ilyich had been the only one to vote against it. We began making preparations for the journey. Vladimir Ilyich's nerves were in such a bad state, he developed a nervous disease caused by the inflammation of the nerve endings on the back and the chest. As soon as I saw the redness, I looked up a medical handbook. I made it out to be ringworm. Bakteryev, who had been a medical student in his 4th or 5th year, confirmed my conjuncture. I painted Vladimir Ilyich with iodine, which caused him excruciating pain. It would not have occurred to us to send for an English doctor, as that would have cost a guinea. Workers in England are usually their own doctors. Since medical assistance is very, very expensive. During the journey to Geneva, Vladimir Ilyich was in great pain. On arriving there, he took to bed and lay there for a fortnight. A job which did not get on Vladimir Ilyich's nerve in London, but rather gave him satisfaction, was writing of the pamphlet to the rural poor. The peasant uprisings of 1902 suggested to him the necessity of the pamphlet for the peasants. He explained in it what the Workers' Party was out and why the peasant poor should go with the workers. It was the first pamphlet in which Vladimir Ilyich had addressed himself to the peasantry. And with that, this is the end of chapter. So next week, we will begin with chapter 3, I believe, which is Geneva. And I hope you have had a Merry Christmas with us. We'll be here next week, will it be New Year's Day, right? We're gonna, oh my God, I know what we should do. We should totally play Boris Yeltsin's gun to the head speech like his resignation speech that he did on New Year's Eve in 1999, which sounds like a gun to the head speech. It's really hilarious. So Feliz Natal, Feliz Navidad, Felice, whatever. Okay. And so with that, I will say Slobodu narodu, smrti fascismu.